The first snow of winter dusted the mountains surrounding Mapleton as Margaret Spencer pulled her well-maintained Volvo into the parking lot of Green Mountain Luxury Apartments. She sat for a moment, gathering her courage while adjusting the handmade scarf around her neck, a Christmas gift she'd knitted for herself last year when no family presents had arrived. The building before her, all glass and polished stone, seemed to reflect the cold December sky, beautiful but uninviting. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 73, Margaret maintained the erect posture and clear blue eyes that had once made her the most photographed maple syrup producer in Vermont tourism brochures. For decades of climbing trees to check taps, hauling buckets, and managing seasonal workers had kept her stronger than most women 20 years her junior. Yet today, her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the quilted bag containing the hand-sewn Christmas stockings she'd made for her grandchildren. "You can do this, Maggie," she whispered to herself, using the nickname her late husband Thomas had given her during their 52 years of marriage. "They're still your family." The 10 months since Thomas's passing had stretched endlessly, each day marked by the conspicuous absence of her children's phone calls. Her son Robert's visits had dwindled from weekly to monthly to, "When we can fit it in, Mom." Her relationship with her daughter-in-law Vanessa had never been warm, but since Thomas's funeral, the temperature had dropped to polar levels. Margaret squared her shoulders and exited her car, careful of the icy patches in the parking lot. The security guard at the front desk recognized her immediately. "Mrs. Spencer. Haven't seen you in a while. Here to see the grandkids?" "Yes, Frank. It's been too long." She didn't mention that her last 3 attempts to visit had been met with excuses about busy schedules and bad timing. "They're on the 5th floor now, ma'am. Moved to the penthouse last month. Very fancy." The news struck Margaret like a physical blow. They'd moved without telling her. She maintained her pleasant expression, a skill perfected through decades of dealing with difficult wholesale customers. "That's wonderful. I'm sure it's lovely." The elevator ride gave Margaret time to process this revelation. Robert and Vanessa had complained constantly about their cramped 3-bedroom apartment, despite it being twice the size of the cozy farmhouse where Margaret had raised Robert and his sister Eleanor. Eleanor now lived in Arizona, her communication limited to birthday cards and occasional texts. The elevator doors opened to reveal a hallway with only 2 doors, the penthouse level. Margaret approached the one marked 5B and hesitated before pressing the doorbell. From inside, she could hear children's laughter and music, a holiday gathering in full swing. The door swung open to reveal 13-year-old Emma, her eldest grandchild, whose expression cycled from surprise to genuine pleasure. "Grandma, I didn't know you were coming." Emma threw her arms around Margaret, her enthusiasm momentarily washing away the older woman's anxiety. "I wanted to surprise you all," Margaret said, returning the hug with equal fervor. "I've missed you terribly." Emma's warmth provided temporary reassurance, but as Margaret entered the apartment, the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. The spacious penthouse was decorated with tasteful holiday ornaments that looked straight out of a design magazine, nothing like the handmade decorations that had filled the Spencer family farm for generations. "Mom?" Robert appeared from the kitchen, a glass of wine in hand, his expression a mixture of shock and discomfort. At 45, he resembled his father, the same strong jaw and dark hair now threaded with silver, but lacked Thomas's easy warmth. "We weren't expecting you. I thought I'd surprise you all with the Christmas stockings I made for the children." Margaret held up the quilted bag. "And maybe help with holiday preparations." Before Robert could respond, Vanessa emerged from the dining area, her slim figure draped in an expensive cashmere sweater. Her perfectly highlighted hair framed a face that had likely seen several cosmetic procedures, though she was only 42. "Margaret," Vanessa's voice carried the chill of a Vermont January. "What an unexpected surprise." "I hope I'm not interrupting," Margaret said, though it was clear from the number of voices and the festive atmosphere that they were hosting a gathering. Actually, Vanessa's gaze flicked toward the quilted bag with barely disguised disdain. "We're having a holiday cocktail party for Robert's colleagues and some neighbors. It's a rather formal affair." Margaret glanced down at her neat but simple outfit, Goodwill slacks and a hand-knitted sweater she'd made herself. Certainly clean and presentable, but admittedly not aligned with the sleek, expensive attire visible on the guests mingling beyond the entryway. "I didn't realize," Margaret said, maintaining her dignity. "I can come back another time." "That might be best," Vanessa replied, relief evident in her voice. Emma, still hovering nearby, protested, "But Mom, Grandma could join us. She makes the best cookies, and she could tell everyone about the maple farm." A flash of something, embarrassment, crossed Vanessa's face. Emma, honey, this is a business event. Mrs. Spencer would probably feel out of place. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The use of a Mrs. Spencer, rather than your grandmother, didn't escape Margaret's notice. Neither did the implication that stories of maple syrup production weren't sophisticated enough for their gathering. Robert, who had remained uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke. Mom, maybe you could come back tomorrow? Or next weekend? We'll call you to set something up. Margaret recognized the dismissal for what it was, the same vague promises. That had kept her at arm's length for months. Still, she managed to smile for Emma's benefit. Of course. I understand. Business is important. She reached into her bag and handed Emma the handcrafted stocking. Here, sweetheart. I made one for you, Jackson, and little Amelia. Emma clutched the stocking to her chest, genuine appreciation shining in her eyes. It's beautiful, Grandma. Just like the ones at the farmhouse. Speaking of the farmhouse, Robert said, setting his wine glass down on a nearby table. I've been meaning to talk to you about that, Mom. It's really too big for just you now that Dad's gone. Margaret felt a prickle of unease. It's my home, Robert. Your father and I built it together. But it's so much maintenance, Vanessa interjected, her tone suggesting concern while her eyes remained cold. All those acres, that ancient building. You're not getting any younger, Margaret. I managed just fine, Margaret replied, stiffening slightly. Thomas made sure everything was in good repair before he passed, and I've kept it that way. Robert and Vanessa exchanged a look that Margaret couldn't quite interpret. Before the conversation could continue, a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit approached from the living room. Robert, there you are. The Hansons were asking about that development project in Burlington. Dr. Campbell, meet my mother, Margaret Spencer, Robert said, his professional smile firmly in place. Mom, this is Dr. Campbell, Chief of Surgery. At Mapleton Memorial. Dr. Campbell extended his hand politely. Ah, the famous maple syrup lady. Robert's mentioned your farm. Quite the Vermont institution, I understand. Thank you, Margaret replied, warming to his genuine interest. We've been producing syrup for 4 generations now. Fascinating. Dr. Campbell seemed about to continue when Vanessa smoothly intervened. Margaret was just leaving, unfortunately. Prior commitment. Such a shame, Dr. Campbell said. I'd love to hear more about traditional syrup production sometime. My wife is always complaining about the mass-produced stuff. Margaret reached into her purse and withdrew a small business card. We ship nationwide. Small batch, organic methods. Your wife might appreciate the difference. Dr. Campbell accepted the card with enthusiasm. Excellent. Robert, Vanessa interrupted sharply. The Hansons? Right, Robert said, shooting his mother an apologetic glance. Mom, I'll walk you out. As they moved toward the door, Emma trailing behind them, the younger grandchildren spotted Margaret from across the room. Grandma. 7-year-old Jackson broke away from the nanny supervising the children in a corner of the vast living room. 5-year-old Amelia followed, her face lighting up. Margaret knelt to embrace them, inhaling their sweet scents and trying to memorize the feeling of their small arms around her neck. It had been nearly 3 months since she'd held them. I brought your Christmas stockings, she said, pulling the remaining handcrafted items from her bag. Just like the ones that used to hang at the farmhouse when your daddy was little. Jackson examined his with genuine interest. Cool. It has a maple tree on it, just like in the pictures. And yours has a cardinal, Amelia, because that's your favorite bird. Amelia clutched her stocking with delight. Can you come read me a story, Grandma? Like last Christmas? Margaret glanced up at Robert, hope flickering briefly, but his expression remained uncomfortably fixed. Not today, sweetheart. Grandma has to go now, but I'll come back soon. Vanessa appeared suddenly beside them, her smile tight. Children, Miss Patricia has some holiday crafts for you in the playroom. Why don't you go join the other kids? The nanny, Patricia, materialized to shepherd the reluctant children away. Margaret noticed that Emma was permitted to stay, perhaps deemed old enough for the adult gathering. At the door, Robert finally spoke without Vanessa's supervision. Mom, I'm sorry about the timing, but we really should talk about the farmhouse soon. It's a valuable property, and it doesn't make sense for you to rattle around there by yourself. Margaret felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December air. The farm is my home, Robert. Your father and I built that business from nothing. I know, Mom, but times change. We need to be practical. The word practical hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Margaret had heard it often from Robert in recent months, usually before discussions about investment opportunities or asset management. "We'll talk after the holidays," she conceded, unwilling to argue in a hallway. "Give the children my love." Robert's goodbye was perfunctory, his mind already back with his guests. As the door closed behind her, Margaret stood for a moment. In the silent hallway, the quilted bag now empty in her hands. The elevator ride down was a blur, her thoughts scattered like the snowflakes now falling more heavily outside. Frank the security guard noticed her expression as she crossed the lobby. "Everything all right, Mrs. Spencer?" "Just fine, Frank. Thank you." The lie came easily, a product of her generation's stoicism in the face of pain. Outside, the snow had thickened, coating her car with a delicate white blanket. Margaret brushed it off methodically, her movements automatic while her mind replayed the interaction. The dismissal had been polite but unmistakable, she didn't fit into her son's carefully curated life anymore. As she settled into the driver's seat, Margaret noticed a small coffee shop across the street, its windows glowing warmly against the gathering darkness. The thought of returning to her empty farmhouse was suddenly unbearable. She needed a moment to compose herself, to process what had happened. The Cozy Bean Cafe was nearly empty this late in the afternoon. A young woman with vibrant red hair pulled into a messy bun looked up from behind the counter as the bell above the door announced Margaret's arrival. "Hello there. Coming out of that snow. What can I get you?" Margaret ordered a simple black coffee, finding comfort in the cafe's unpretentious atmosphere. Mismatched furniture, local artwork on the walls, and the scent of freshly baked goods created an environment worlds away from the sterile elegance of Robert and Vanessa's penthouse. "Mind if I join you?" the red-headed barista approached with Margaret's coffee and a plate with a large cinnamon roll. "On the house. You look like you could use something sweet." Surprised by the kindness, Margaret gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Please do. Though you must have better things to do than keep an old woman company." "I'm Lily," the young woman said, settling into the chair. "And there's no place I'd rather be. Business is slow during the evening storm, and you have kind eyes." Something about Lily's forthright manner reminded Margaret of herself in younger days, before life had taught her to guard her expressions and measure her words. "I'm Margaret Spencer. Most people call me Maggie, though not many do these days." "Spencer?" Lily's eyes widened. "Of Spencer's Maple Farm? My grandfather swore by your syrup. Said it was the only kind worth putting on pancakes." The unexpected recognition brought a genuine smile to Margaret's face. "That's very kind. We've been making it the same way for generations." "I use it in my baking here," Lily confided. "More expensive than the commercial stuff, but you can taste the difference." As they chatted, Margaret found herself unexpectedly at ease. Lily was 32, she learned, and had opened the Cozy Bean after leaving a high-pressure corporate job in Boston. She spoke with passion about creating a welcoming space where people could connect. "Sorry if I'm talking too much," Lily said eventually. "My grandmother always said I was born with extra words." "It's nice to have someone listen to mine," Margaret admitted. "My family doesn't have much time for maple syrup stories these days." Something in her tone must have revealed more than she intended, because Lily's expression softened with understanding. "Tough visit?" she asked gently. Margaret hesitated. Vermonters weren't known for sharing personal troubles with strangers. But something about Lily's genuine interest cracked the wall she'd carefully maintained. "My son and his wife were entertaining. I wasn't expected." The simple statement encompassed volumes of rejection. Lily nodded, requiring no further explanation. "Family can be complicated, especially around the holidays." "Indeed." Margaret sipped her coffee, which had grown cold. "My husband passed earlier this year. I think I expected the children to draw closer, not pull away." "I'm so sorry about your husband," Lily said, genuine compassion in her voice. "And I'm sorry your family doesn't recognize what they have in you." The simple acknowledgement of her pain, offered without judgment or platitudes, touched something deep in Margaret's heart. A tear escaped before she could prevent it, sliding down her weathered cheek. "Oh, look at me," she said, brushing it away quickly. "Getting emotional with a stranger. Thomas would say I'm turning sentimental in my old age." "I think he'd say you're human," Lily replied. "And sometimes humans need to be seen, especially when they're hurting." Margaret looked at this young woman, a stranger an hour ago, who had shown more genuine interest in her well-being than her own son had in months. The contrast was both painful and illuminating. "Would you like to hear about the farm?" Margaret found herself asking. "About how Thomas and I built it from a small family operation into what it is today." "I'd love nothing more," Lily answered, settling back in her chair. "And I'll put on a fresh pot of coffee. This feels like a story worth hearing properly." As the snow continued to fall outside, creating a cocoon of white silence around the cafe, Margaret began to speak. She told Lily about meeting Thomas in high school, about his family's struggling maple farm with just 50 trees tapped, about their vision to expand while maintaining traditional methods. "We lived in a one-room cabin the first 3 years," Margaret recalled, smiling at the memory. "No running water, just a wood stove and each other. Robert was born there. I labored for 18 hours while Thomas boiled that year's syrup. He couldn't leave it or we'd have lost the whole batch." Lily laughed. "That's dedication to both family and business." "It was never just business," Margaret said softly. "It was our life, our love, in every bottle we produced." As she spoke, Margaret felt something shifting inside her, the tight knot of rejection loosening as she reconnected with her own story, her own worth. This young woman saw value in experiences that Vanessa had dismissed as quaint at best, embarrassing at worst. "What will happen to the farm now?" Lily asked when Margaret paused. The question brought Margaret back to Robert's pointed comments about the farmhouse being too big and impractical. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Robert seems to think I should sell it. It's valuable land, developers have been trying to buy it for years. But it's not just property to me. It's..." She struggled to find the words. "It's your legacy, Lily." Supplied. "Your heart's work." "Exactly." Margaret looked at Lily with newfound appreciation. "How is it that you understand what my own son can't seem to grasp?" Lily refilled their coffee cups, considering the question. "Sometimes people closest to us are too focused on what they want us to be instead of seeing who we actually are." The statement resonated deeply with Margaret. When had Robert stopped seeing her as a person with her own dreams and values? When had she become merely an asset to be managed, a problem to be solved? "I should get home before the roads get worse," Margaret said finally, noticing the time. "Thank you, Lily. For the coffee and much more." "Come back anytime," Lily replied. "I mean that. This place gets quiet in the evenings, and I'd love to hear more of your stories." As Margaret prepared to leave, she found herself reluctant to end this unexpected connection. On impulse, she reached into her purse and withdrew a small bottle of maple syrup. She always carried a few for potential customers. "A small thank you," she said, pressing it into Lily's hand. "The Grade A Dark. It has the strongest flavor, best for baking." Lily accepted the gift with genuine appreciation. "I'll use it in tomorrow's cinnamon rolls. You'll have to come back and tell me if they measure up." The invitation, so simply offered, acted as a balm to the rejection Margaret had faced earlier. "I just might do that." The drive home through the snow-covered roads gave Margaret time to reflect. The contrast between her reception at Robert's elegant penthouse and the warmth she'd found in a simple cafe couldn't have been starker. One had left her feeling diminished, irrelevant, the other had reminded her of her own worth, her own story. The farmhouse lights welcomed her as she pulled into the long driveway. Though empty of family, the sturdy structure still felt like home in a way Robert's sleek apartment never could. Thomas had built much of it himself, expanding the original cabin as their family and business grew. Inside, Margaret moved through her evening routine with measured steps. She fed Maple, the aging farm cat who had been Thomas's constant shadow. She checked the thermostat and added wood to the stove that supplemented the central heating. She heated a simple soup for dinner, eating alone at the kitchen table where thousands of family meals had once been shared. But tonight, something felt different. The empty chairs around the table didn't seem to echo with absence quite as loudly. The conversation with Lily had awakened something in Margaret, a reminder that her story wasn't over simply because some characters had exited the narrative. As she prepared for bed, Margaret paused before the large cedar chest at the foot of the bed she'd shared with Thomas for over 5 decades. She hesitated only briefly before lifting the heavy lid. Inside lay treasures from her life with Thomas, his wedding suit, now delicate with age, albums filled with photographs, the blanket they'd wrapped newborn Robert in. Beneath these familiar items, wrapped carefully in acid-free paper, lay the Spencer family heirloom, a handcrafted silver maple leaf brooch set with small Vermont opals. It had belonged to Thomas's grandmother, then his mother, and finally to Margaret on her wedding day. "The Spencer women have worn this for generations," her mother-in-law had told her. "It's a symbol of our connection to the land, to the trees that have sustained this family." Margaret had worn it proudly for decades, but in recent years, it had remained in the cedar chest. Vanessa had admired it once, shortly after marrying Robert, her interest notably focused on the opal's value rather than the brooch's history. "You'll have this someday," Margaret had promised, assuming the family tradition would continue. Now, holding the brooch in her palm, Margaret wasn't so certain. Would Vanessa appreciate its significance, or would it become merely another asset to be appraised and potentially sold? Would her grandchildren ever hear the stories behind it, or would the family history be erased in favor of a more sophisticated narrative? As Margaret prepared for sleep in the quiet farmhouse, these questions circled in her mind. The rejection she'd experienced that day had cracked something open inside her, a realization that perhaps the legacy she and Thomas had built deserved more than reluctant obligation. Perhaps it deserved true appreciation. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the maple grove in a blanket of pristine white. The trees stood in silent witness, their branches reaching toward the night sky, dormant now, but holding within them the promise of spring's sweet renewal. Margaret fell asleep to the gentle creaking of the old farmhouse, a sound that had once irritated Robert but had always reminded her of a living entity, breathing alongside its inhabitants. She dreamed of Thomas that night, not as he had been in his final illness, but as the strong young man who had looked at a struggling family farm and seen possibility. In her dream, he smiled at her with the same quiet confidence he'd always shown when facing challenges. "Remember who you are, Maggie," he said in the dream. "Remember what we built, and why." When Margaret awoke the next morning, weak winter sunlight filtering through the bedroom window, something had settled within her. The hurt remained, but alongside it grew a seedling of determination. Robert and Vanessa's rejection had wounded her deeply, but perhaps it had also freed her from expectations that no longer served her well. As she moved through her morning routine, Margaret found herself considering possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to contemplate before. The farmhouse and business weren't just assets to be maintained until Robert decided their fate. They were still hers, to nurture, to share, or even to reimagine. For the first time since Thomas's passing, Margaret felt a flicker of anticipation for what might lie ahead. She glanced at the calendar hanging beside the kitchen phone. December stretched before her, no longer an empty expanse of lonely days. Until a potentially uncomfortable family Christmas, but a period of possibility. She reached for the phone, hesitating only briefly before dialing. It was time to take control of her story again, to honor the legacy she and Thomas had built in ways that reflected their true values. Cozy Bean Cafe, Lily's cheerful voice answered after several rings. "Lily? It's Margaret Spencer. I was wondering if that invitation for cinnamon rolls was still open?" "Maggie. Of course it is. They're just coming out of the oven." The use of her nickname, spoken with genuine warmth, felt like a small homecoming. Margaret smiled as she replied, "I'll be there in 30 minutes. "And Lily? I have a story I'd like to tell you, about a maple leaf brooch and what it might mean for the future." Artifact, in the peaceful town of Mapleton, Vermont, a devoted grandmother was about to face the most hurtful words a mother could hear. What began as an eager holiday visit turned into public humiliation when her daughter-in-law screamed for her to leave or face security. Margaret Spencer wasn't your typical fragile elderly woman. For 42 years, she had been the backbone of her family's maple syrup business, known throughout New England for her warm hospitality and unwavering devotion to family traditions. When she encountered an unexpected ally in a young cafe owner, she had no idea she was about to make the most liberating decision of her life. What started as cruel rejection would transform into a community-embracing rebirth when a cherished family heirloom found its way to truly appreciative hands. The first snow of winter dusted the mountains surrounding Mapleton as Margaret Spencer pulled her well-maintained Volvo into the parking lot of Green Mountain luxury apartments. She sat for a moment, gathering her courage while adjusting the handmade scarf around her neck, a Christmas gift she'd knitted for herself last year when no family presents had arrived. The building before her, all glass and polished stone, seemed to reflect the cold December sky, beautiful but uninviting. At 73, Margaret maintained the erect posture and clear blue eyes that had once made her the most photographed maple syrup producer in Vermont tourism brochures. For decades of climbing trees to check taps, hauling buckets, and managing seasonal workers had kept her stronger than most women 20 years her junior. Yet today, her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the quilted bag containing the hand-sewn Christmas stockings she'd made for her grandchildren. "You can do this, Maggie," she whispered to herself, using the nickname her late husband Thomas had given her during their 52 years of marriage. "They're still your family." The 10 months since Thomas's passing had stretched endlessly, each day marked by the conspicuous absence of her children's phone calls. Her son Robert's visits had dwindled from weekly to monthly to, "When we can fit it in, Mom." Her relationship with her daughter-in-law Vanessa had never been warm, but since Thomas's funeral, the temperature had dropped to polar levels. Margaret squared her shoulders and exited her car, careful of the icy patches in the parking lot. The security guard at the front desk recognized her immediately. "Mrs. Spencer. Haven't seen you in a while. Here to see the grandkids?" "Yes, Frank. It's been too long." She didn't mention that her last 3 attempts to visit had been met with excuses about busy schedules and bad timing. "They're on the 5th floor now, ma'am. Moved to the penthouse last month. Very fancy." The news struck Margaret like a physical blow. They'd moved without telling her. She maintained her pleasant expression, a skill perfected through decades of dealing with difficult wholesale customers. That's wonderful. I'm sure it's lovely. The elevator ride gave Margaret time to process this revelation. Robert and Vanessa had complained constantly about their cramped, three-bedroom apartment, despite it being twice the size of the cozy farmhouse where Margaret had raised Robert and his sister Eleanor. Eleanor now lived in Arizona, her communication limited to birthday cards and occasional texts. The elevator doors opened to reveal a hallway with only 2 doors, the penthouse level. Margaret approached the one marked 5B and hesitated before pressing the doorbell. From inside, she could hear children's laughter and music, a holiday gathering in full swing. The door swung open to reveal 13-year-old Emma, her eldest grandchild, whose expression cycled from surprise to genuine pleasure. "Grandma, I didn't know you were coming." Emma threw her arms around Margaret, her enthusiasm momentarily washing away the older woman's anxiety. "I wanted to surprise you all," Margaret said, returning the hug with equal fervor. "I've missed you terribly." Emma's warmth provided temporary reassurance, but as Margaret entered the apartment, the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. The spacious penthouse was decorated with tasteful holiday ornaments that looked straight out of a design magazine, nothing like the handmade decorations that had filled the Spencer family farm for generations. "Mom?" Robert appeared from the kitchen, a glass of wine in hand, his expression a mixture of shock and discomfort. At 45, he resembled his father, the same strong jaw and dark hair now threaded with silver, but lacked Thomas's easy warmth. "We weren't expecting you. I thought I'd surprise you all with the Christmas stockings I made for the children." Margaret held up the quilted bag. "And maybe help with holiday preparations." Before Robert could respond, Vanessa emerged from the dining area, her slim figure draped in an expensive cashmere sweater. Her perfectly highlighted hair framed a face that had likely seen several cosmetic procedures, though she was only 42. "Margaret," Vanessa's voice carried the chill of a Vermont January. "What an unexpected surprise." "I hope I'm not interrupting," Margaret said, though it was clear from the number of voices and the festive atmosphere that they were hosting a gathering. Actually, Vanessa's gaze flicked toward the quilted bag with barely disguised disdain. "We're having a holiday cocktail party for Robert's colleagues and some neighbors. It's a rather formal affair." Margaret glanced down at her neat but simple outfit, Goodwill slacks and a hand-knitted sweater she'd made herself. Certainly clean and presentable, but admittedly not aligned with the sleek, expensive attire visible on the guests mingling beyond the entryway. "I didn't realize," Margaret said, maintaining her dignity. "I can come back another time." "That might be best," Vanessa replied, relief evident in her voice. Emma, still hovering nearby, protested, "But Mom, Grandma could join us. She makes the best cookies, and she could tell everyone about the maple farm." A flash of something, embarrassment, crossed Vanessa's face. "Emma, honey, this is a business event. Mrs. Spencer would probably feel out of place." The use of a Mrs. Spencer, rather than your grandmother, didn't escape Margaret's notice. Neither did the implication that stories of maple syrup production weren't sophisticated enough for their gathering. Robert, who had remained uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke. "Mom, maybe you could come back tomorrow? Or next weekend? We'll call you to set something up." Margaret recognized the dismissal for what it was, the same vague promises that had kept her at arm's length for months. Still, she managed a smile for Emma's benefit. "Of course. I understand. Business is important." She reached into her bag and handed Emma the handcrafted stocking. "Here, sweetheart. I made one for you, Jackson, and little Amelia." Emma clutched the stocking to her chest, genuine appreciation shining in her eyes. "It's beautiful, Grandma. Just like the ones at the farmhouse." "Speaking of the farmhouse," Robert said, setting his wine glass down on a nearby table. "I've been meaning to talk to you about that, Mom. It's really too big for just you now that Dad's gone." Margaret felt a prickle of unease. "It's my home, Robert. Your father and I built it together." "But it's so much maintenance," Vanessa interjected, her tone suggesting concern while her eyes remained cold. "All those acres, that ancient building. You're not getting any younger, Margaret." "I managed just fine," Margaret replied, stiffening slightly. "Thomas made sure everything was in good repair before he passed, and I've kept it that way." Robert and Vanessa exchanged a look that Margaret couldn't quite interpret. Before the conversation could continue, a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit approached from the living room. "Robert, there you are. The Hansons were asking about that development project in Burlington." "Dr. Campbell, meet my mother, Margaret Spencer," Robert said, his professional smile firmly in place. "Mom, this is Dr. Campbell, Chief of Surgery." At Mapleton Memorial. Dr. Campbell extended his hand politely. Ah, the famous maple syrup lady. Roberts mentioned your farm. Quite the Vermont institution, I understand. Thank you, Margaret replied, warming to his genuine interest. We've been producing syrup for 4 generations now. Fascinating. Dr. Campbell seemed about to continue when Vanessa smoothly intervened. Margaret was just leaving, unfortunately. Prior commitment. Such a shame, Dr. Campbell said. I'd love to hear more about traditional syrup production sometime. My wife is always complaining about the mass-produced stuff. Margaret reached into her purse and withdrew a small business card. We ship nationwide. Small batch, organic methods. Your wife might appreciate the difference. Dr. Campbell accepted the card with enthusiasm. Excellent. Robert, Vanessa interrupted sharply. The Hansons? Right, Robert said, shooting his mother an apologetic glance. Mom, I'll walk you out. As they moved toward the door, Emma trailing behind them, the younger grandchildren spotted Margaret from across the room. Grandma. 7-year-old Jackson broke away from the nanny supervising the children in a corner of the vast living room. 5-year-old Amelia followed, her face lighting up. Margaret knelt to embrace them, inhaling their sweet scents and trying to memorize the feeling of their small arms around her neck. It had been nearly 3 months since she'd held them. I brought your Christmas stockings, she said, pulling the remaining handcrafted items from her bag. Just like the ones that used to hang at the farmhouse when your daddy was little. Jackson examined his with genuine interest. Cool. It has a maple tree on it, just like in the pictures. And yours has a cardinal, Amelia, because that's your favorite bird. Amelia clutched her stocking with delight. Can you come read me a story, Grandma? Like last Christmas? Margaret glanced up at Robert, hope flickering briefly, but his expression remained uncomfortably fixed. Not today, sweetheart. Grandma has to go now, but I'll come back soon. Vanessa appeared suddenly beside them, her smile tight. Children, Miss Patricia has some holiday crafts for you in the playroom. Why don't you go join the other kids? The nanny, Patricia, materialized to shepherd the reluctant children away. Margaret noticed that Emma was permitted to stay, perhaps deemed old enough for the adult gathering. At the door, Robert finally spoke without Vanessa's supervision. Mom, I'm sorry about the timing, but we really should talk about the farmhouse soon. It's a valuable property, and it doesn't make sense for you to rattle around there by yourself. Margaret felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December air. The farm is my home, Robert. Your father and I built that business from nothing. I know, Mom, but times change. We need to be practical. The word practical hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Margaret had heard it often from Robert in recent months, usually before discussions about investment opportunities or asset management. We'll talk after the holidays, she conceded, unwilling to argue in a hallway. Give the children my love. Robert's goodbye was perfunctory, his mind already back with his guests. As the door closed behind her, Margaret stood for a moment. In the silent hallway, the quilted bag now empty in her hands. The elevator ride down was a blur, her thoughts scattered like the snowflakes now falling more heavily outside. Frank the security guard noticed her expression as she crossed the lobby. Everything all right, Mrs. Spencer? Just fine, Frank. Thank you. The lie came easily, a product of her generation's stoicism in the face of pain. Outside, the snow had thickened, coating her car with a delicate white blanket. Margaret brushed it off methodically, her movements automatic while her mind replayed the interaction. The dismissal had been polite but unmistakable, she didn't fit into her son's carefully curated life anymore. As she settled into the driver's seat, Margaret's gaze fell on the small cafe across the street, the Cozy Bean, its windows glowing with warm light against the gathering darkness. Making a sudden decision, she stepped back into the cold and crossed the street. The cafe's bell tinkled pleasantly as she entered, announcing her arrival to the red-haired young woman behind the counter. Hello there. Coming out of that snow, the woman called cheerfully. What can I get you? Just a black coffee, please, Margaret replied, finding unexpected comfort in the cafe's unpretentious atmosphere. The mismatched furniture, local artwork, and scent of freshly baked goods created an environment worlds away from the sterile elegance of Robert and Vanessa's penthouse. Mind if I join you? The barista approached with Margaret's coffee and a plate with a large cinnamon roll. On the house. You look like you could use something sweet. Surprised by the kindness, Margaret gestured to the empty chair across from her. Please do, though you must have better things to do than keep an old woman company. I'm Lily, the young woman said, settling into the chair. And there's no place I'd rather be. Business is slow during a snowstorm, and you have kind eyes. Their conversation flowed easily, a balm to Margaret's wounded spirit. Lily was 32, the owner of the Cozy Bean, and had left a high-pressure corporate job in Boston to pursue a simpler, more meaningful life in Vermont. When she discovered Margaret was the owner of Spencer's maple farm, her enthusiasm was genuine. "My grandfather swore by your syrup. Said it was the only kind worth putting on pancakes." The recognition brought a smile to Margaret's face. "That's very kind. We've been making it the same way for generations." As the evening progressed, Margaret found herself sharing more than she had intended, about Thomas's passing, about Robert's increasing distance, about the painful dismissal she'd just experienced. "You know what's ironic?" Margaret said, warming her hands around her second cup of coffee. "Robert grew up helping with every aspect of the farm. He knew all the old stories, all the traditions. He used to be so proud of what his father and I had built." "What changed?" Lily asked gently. Margaret considered the question. "Success, I suppose. He went to college, then business school. Met Vanessa, who came from money and had certain expectations. Gradually, the farm became something embarrassing rather than something to celebrate." "That's their loss," Lily said firmly. "What you and your husband created is something remarkable. A living legacy." The simple validation brought unexpected tears to Margaret's eyes. "Thank you, Lily. It's been a while since anyone has seen it that way." Their conversation continued as the cafe emptied of its few remaining customers. Lily locked the door but invited Margaret to stay while she cleaned up. There was something comforting about watching the young woman's efficient movements, so reminiscent of Margaret's own practical nature. "Do you have family coming for Christmas?" Lily asked as she wiped down the counters. Margaret hesitated. "I'm not sure. Robert and Vanessa usually host Christmas dinner, but this year..." She let the sentence trail off, unwilling to voice her suspicion that she might not receive an invitation. "Well, if you find yourself at loose ends, I host a dinner here at the cafe for anyone who doesn't have a place to go. Nothing fancy, but good food and good company." The kindness of the offer touched Margaret deeply. "That's very generous of you." "Not really," Lily said with a shrug. "My parents died when I was in college. Holidays were tough until I started creating my own traditions. Now it's my favorite day of the year." As Margaret prepared to leave, she reached into her purse and withdrew a small bottle of maple syrup. She always carried a few for potential customers. "A small thank you," she said, pressing it into Lily's hand. "Grade A dark. It has the strongest flavor, best for baking." Lily accepted the gift with genuine appreciation. "I'll use it in tomorrow's cinnamon rolls. You'll have to come back and tell me if they measure up." The invitation, so simply offered, was a balm to the rejection Margaret had faced earlier. "I just might do that." The drive home through snow-covered roads gave Margaret time to reflect. The contrast between her reception at Robert's elegant penthouse and the warmth she'd found in a simple cafe couldn't have been starker. One had left her feeling diminished and irrelevant, the other had reminded her of her own worth. The farmhouse lights welcomed her as she pulled into the long driveway. Though empty of family, the sturdy structure still felt like home in a way Robert's sleek apartment never could. Thomas had built much of it himself, expanding the original cabin as their family and business grew. That night, unable to sleep, Margaret found herself drawn to the cedar chest at the foot of her bed. Inside lay treasures from her life with Thomas, his wedding suit, now delicate with age, albums filled with photographs, and beneath these familiar items, wrapped carefully in acid-free paper, the Spencer family heirloom, a handcrafted silver maple leaf brooch set with small Vermont opals. "The Spencer women have worn this for generations," her mother-in-law had told her. "It's a symbol of our connection to the land, to the trees that have sustained this family." Margaret had worn it proudly for decades, but in recent years, it had remained in the cedar chest. Vanessa had admired it once, shortly after marrying Robert, her interest notably focused on the opal's value rather than the brooch's history. "You'll have this someday," Margaret had promised, assuming the family tradition would continue. Now, holding the brooch in her palm, Margaret wasn't so certain. Would Vanessa appreciate its significance, or would it become merely another asset to be appraised and potentially sold? The following morning, Margaret awoke with a sense of purpose that had been missing since Thomas's death. She dressed carefully, pinning the maple leaf brooch to her sweater. Today, she would begin reclaiming her sense of self. Her first stop was the Cozy Bean, where Lily's welcome was as warm as if they'd known each other for years rather than a single evening. True to her word, she had used Margaret's maple syrup in her cinnamon rolls. "These are extraordinary," Margaret said after taking a bite. Thomas would have approved. High praise, Lily beamed. "Are you off on errands today?" "Actually," Margaret said, "I thought I might take you up on your offer to hear more about the farm. If you're still interested." Lily's face lit up. "More than interested. But what about the cafe? I'm happy to wait until you close, or another day entirely. No need, Lily replied. My assistant manager will be here at noon. We could head out to the farm then, if that suits you? The plan was made, and Margaret spent the morning running necessary errands in town. At the bank, she was greeted by name, her family had been customers for generations. At the grocery store, she chatted with locals who inquired about syrup availability for the holidays. At the post office, she arranged shipments for mail orders that continued to arrive despite the business's reduced operations since Thomas's passing. Each interaction reinforced what Margaret had begun to realize the previous evening, that her identity wasn't defined solely by her relationship to Robert and his family. She had built connections and respect in this community through decades of hard work and integrity. At noon, Lily climbed into Margaret's Volvo, her vibrant energy bringing warmth to the winter day. As they drove the winding road to Spencer's Maple Farm, Margaret found herself seeing the property through fresh eyes. The snow-covered hills, the neat rows of sugar maples, the sturdy farmhouse with smoke curling from its chimney, it was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with property values or development potential. This is incredible, Lily breathed. As they pulled up the long driveway. It's like something from a Vermont postcard. It's been in Thomas's family for 5 generations, Margaret explained. Though it was much smaller when we took over. Just 50 acres then. Now we have 300, all managed sustainably. Inside the farmhouse, Margaret gave Lily a tour. The kitchen with its large hearth where they'd boiled the first batches of syrup before building the sugar house. The dining room where they'd hosted countless family meals and business meetings. The sun porch Thomas had added for their 25th anniversary, where Margaret still had her morning coffee while watching the sunrise over the mountains. It's so warm, Lily commented. Not just the temperature, but the feeling. Every room tells a story. That's exactly it, Margaret agreed, surprised and pleased by Lily's perception. Thomas and I believed in creating spaces that nurtured both body and spirit. They moved to the sugar house, where the equipment for syrup production was maintained in spotless condition despite the off-season. Margaret explained the process, the tapping of trees, the collection of sap, the precise boiling required to create different grades of syrup. We've modernized some aspects, she explained, but we've kept the traditional methods where it matters for quality. That was Thomas's philosophy, embrace progress without sacrificing essence. A good philosophy for life, too, Lily observed. They ended the tour in Thomas's office, now Margaret's, where the business records were kept alongside family photographs and awards for their syrup. This is where I feel him most strongly, Margaret admitted, touching a framed photo of Thomas standing proudly beside their first commercial evaporator. He kept everything organized so meticulously. You must miss him terribly, Lily said softly. Every day, Margaret agreed. But more than that, I miss who I was with him, part of a team, building something meaningful together. You're still that person, Lily said with quiet conviction. The farm is still here. The legacy continues. As they sat in the comfortable office chairs, sipping hot cider Margaret had prepared, their conversation turned to the future. Robert wants me to sell, Margaret confided. He thinks it's impractical for me to stay here alone. And what do you think? Lily asked. The question, posed without judgment or expectation, gave Margaret pause. What did she think? Since Thomas's passing, she'd been reacting to others' expectations, Robert's increasingly transparent hints about selling, the reduced operations they'd implemented during Thomas's illness, the community's gentle concern for a widow managing alone. I think, she said slowly, discovering her own truth as she spoke, that I'm not ready to give up everything Thomas and I built together. But I'm also not sure I can maintain it all by myself, at least not the way it deserves. Lily nodded thoughtfully. Those aren't the only 2 options, though, are they? It doesn't have to be all or nothing. The observation struck Margaret with the force of revelation. She'd been thinking in absolutes, keep everything exactly as it was during Thomas's life or sell it all and retreat to some sensible senior apartment. But there were infinite possibilities between those extremes. No, she agreed, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. There could be a middle path. Their conversation continued, expanding into possibilities Margaret hadn't allowed herself to consider. By the time they returned to town, a seed had been planted in Margaret's mind, not fully formed yet, but taking root. Thank you, Lily, Margaret said as she dropped the young woman at the cafe. For listening, for seeing the value in what we created. Thank you for sharing it with me, Lily replied. The farm is special, Margaret. And so are you. That evening, Margaret received a text message from Robert, need to discuss farm situation. Business opportunity. Lunch tomorrow? The timing wasn't coincidental, she suspected. Robert had likely heard from one of his contacts in town that his mother had been giving tours of the property. He'd always been quick to respond to anything that might affect his financial interests. Margaret agreed to meet him at an upscale restaurant in Burlington, knowing the conversation ahead would be challenging. She slept restlessly, dreams filled with images of the farm being dismantled, the trees cut down, the farmhouse demolished to make way for luxury condominiums. She awoke determined to approach the meeting with clarity and strength. After careful consideration, she once again pinned the maple leaf brooch to her sweater, a tangible reminder of the legacy she was protecting. The restaurant Robert had chosen was exactly what Margaret expected: sleek, expensive, with a clientele dressed in business attire. Robert was already seated when she arrived, engrossed in his smartphone. "Mom," he greeted her, rising briefly as she approached. "You look well." "Thank you, Robert," Margaret replied, settling into the chair across from him. "How are the children?" "Fine, fine. Busy with holiday activities." His cursory response made it clear that family updates weren't the purpose of this meeting. "I've ordered a bottle of wine. The Pinot Grigio you like." Margaret nodded, though her wine preferences had actually shifted to reds in recent years, a change Robert wouldn't have noticed during his infrequent visits. After their orders were placed, Robert wasted no time getting to the point. "Mom, I've been contacted by Burlington Heights Development. They're very interested in the farm property." "I'm aware," Margaret replied calmly. "They've been sending offers for years. Your father always declined." "Yes, well, the situation is different now." Robert's tone was measured, as if explaining something complex to a child. "They've significantly increased their offer. It's a remarkable opportunity." "Remarkable for whom?" The question caught Robert off guard. "For all of us, of course. The property value has skyrocketed with all the wealthy out-of-staters looking for Vermont retreats. The timing couldn't be better to sell." "And what would they do with the farm?" Margaret asked, though she already knew the answer. Robert's enthusiasm increased as he outlined the developer's vision: a luxury resort with private cabins, a spa utilizing authentic Vermont elements, and an artisanal food experience that would honor the property's heritage. "They'd even keep the Spencer name," he added, as if this were a significant concession. "Spencer Retreat and Spa. It has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Margaret took a deliberate sip of her water before responding. "And the maple trees? The sugar house? The farmhouse your father built?" Robert's expression shifted, revealing his impatience. "Mom, be reasonable. Progress requires change. The trees that aren't cleared for building would become decorative elements. The sugar house could be converted to a gift shop. As for the farmhouse..." He hesitated. "It's charming, but not up to current building codes for commercial use. They'd likely start fresh." "I see." Margaret's voice remained steady despite the pain his words caused. "And where do I fit into this vision of progress?" "That's what I wanted to discuss," Robert said, his tone brightening. "The deal includes a lifetime apartment for you at Green Mountain Luxury Residences. Top floor, beautiful views. All maintenance and utilities included. You'd never have to worry about shoveling snow or fixing a leaky roof again." "Very practical," Margaret observed, using the word Robert himself favored. "And the proceeds from the sale?" "The development company would pay a generous sum up front, with additional payments phased over 5 years. After setting aside funds for your lifetime care, the remainder would be structured in a family trust." "Which you would manage," Margaret concluded. "Well, yes. I have the financial expertise." Robert paused as their meals arrived. "It makes the most sense, Mom. For everyone." As they ate, Robert continued outlining the benefits of his plan, his enthusiasm growing with each point. The resort would provide jobs for the community. The Spencer name would remain prominent. The family would have guaranteed financial security for generations. Margaret listened quietly, allowing him to present his case fully. When he finally paused, she set down her fork and looked directly at her son. "Robert, do you remember the summer you were 10, when the big maple by the pond split during a thunderstorm?" The abrupt change of subject visibly confused him. "Vaguely." "What does that have to do with, your father was devastated. That tree was over 100 years old. He spent 3 days figuring out how to save it, researching, calling experts, finally designing a brace system himself. You helped him install it." "Mom, childhood memories are nice, but we're discussing a multi-million-dollar business opportunity." "The tree survived," Margaret continued as if he hadn't spoken. "It's still there, still producing sap every spring. Your father taught you something important that summer, about not giving up on something valuable just because saving it requires effort." Robert's expression hardened. "This is completely different. That was a single tree. We're talking about your future, about financial security. No, Margaret said gently. We're talking about values. About what it means to be a Spencer. Being a Spencer in today's world means adapting to reality, Robert countered, his frustration becoming evident. Dad's gone, Mom. The farm is too much for you. Why can't you see I'm trying to help? I believe you think you're helping, Margaret acknowledged. But I don't need the kind of help you're offering. She reached across the table and placed her hand on his, a gesture of affection despite their disagreement. I'm not selling the farm, Robert. Not to Burlington Heights Development, not to anyone. Robert withdrew his hand, his expression shuddering. This is emotion talking, not logic. You're making a mistake that affects all of us. Perhaps, Margaret conceded. But it's my mistake to make. The remainder of their lunch was strained. Conversation limited to safe topics like the unusually heavy snowfall and Robert's recent golf trip to Florida. As they prepared to leave, Robert made one final attempt. Just think about it, Mom. Don't dismiss a life-changing opportunity because of sentimentality. Margaret looked at her son, this successful, practical man who had once been a boy with dirt under his fingernails and maple sap in his hair. What had happened to that child who had worked alongside his father with such pride? I will always think carefully about decisions that affect our family's legacy, she promised. I hope you'll do the same. The drive back to Mapleton gave Margaret time to process the conversation. Robert's disappointment had been palpable, his frustration barely contained. He truly believed he was acting in her best interest, but his definition of best interest revolved entirely around financial security and practical convenience, with no consideration for emotional connection or historical significance. As she pulled into her driveway, Margaret noticed an unfamiliar car parked near the farmhouse. A slim woman in an expensive-looking coat stood on the porch, examining the architectural details. Margaret approached cautiously. Can I help you? The woman turned, revealing a professionally pleasant smile. Mrs. Spencer? I'm Claire Davidson from Burlington Heights Development. I was in the area and thought I'd stop by to introduce myself. Your son mentioned he was speaking with you about our offer today. The presumption stung, but Margaret maintained her composure. Did he tell you I'd be receptive to a visit? Well, not explicitly, Claire admitted, her smile unwavering. But we find that seeing the vision in person often helps property owners understand the exciting possibilities we're offering. I see. And did you call ahead to arrange this visit? I tried to reach you, but, Ms. Davidson, Margaret interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. I appreciate your professional interest in my property, but I must ask you to leave. I do not welcome unannounced visits, nor am I interested in selling to your company. Claire's smile faltered slightly. Mrs. Spencer, perhaps you don't fully understand the exceptional nature of our offer. We're prepared to be very generous. I understand perfectly, Margaret replied. What you don't understand is that some things aren't for sale at any price. As the development representative reluctantly returned to her car, Margaret felt a curious mixture of emotions, indignation at the intrusion, sadness at Robert's transparent manipulation, but beneath these, a growing sense of certainty. The farm was not merely an asset to be liquidated, it was the physical embodiment of values she and Thomas had lived by. That evening, as Margaret sat in Thomas's favorite chair by the fireplace, she found herself reaching for the phone. Not to call Robert, that conversation could wait until emotions had cooled, but to call someone who had shown genuine appreciation for what the Spencer farm represented. Lily? It's Margaret Spencer. I was wondering if you might have time for a cup of coffee tomorrow. There's something I'd like to discuss with you. As she hung up, Margaret glanced at the maple leaf brooch still pinned to her sweater. Its silver surface caught the firelight, the small opals gleaming within her fire. 5 generations of Spencer. Women had worn it, each adding their own story to its legacy. Perhaps it was time to think more creatively about what legacy truly meant. Outside, the winter night had settled over the farm, snow reflecting moonlight across the hills. The maple trees stood in silent witness, their bare branches reaching toward the star-filled sky, dormant now, but holding within them the promise of spring's renewal. Margaret felt a similar promise stirring within herself. The confrontation with Robert had been painful but clarifying. Now she could see the path forward with increasing clarity. Tomorrow would bring new conversations, new possibilities. For the first time since Thomas's passing, Margaret felt a genuine sense of anticipation. The farm had sustained generations of Spencers. Perhaps now it was time for Margaret to reimagine how it might continue to do so, in ways Robert couldn't yet understand. She smiled to herself, remembering Thomas's favorite saying when faced with seemingly insurmountable challenges, every problem contains its own solution, Maggie. You just have to be willing to see with fresh eyes. With that thought warming her, Margaret Spencer prepared for bed, already planning the conversation she would have with Lily tomorrow, about heritage and innovation, about honoring the past while embracing the future, and about the unexpected places where true family might be found. Artifact ID equals 3FA0D8Fa7B984E76B94F2AF633D6D9C3. Type equals text/markdown. Title equals Her True Story from Vermont. Part 3. The cozy bean was quiet the following morning, just a few regulars nursing coffees while typing on laptops or reading newspapers. Lily had reserved a corner table, slightly removed from the others, with a small, reserved sign that she whisked away as Margaret entered. I brought fresh scones, Margaret said, placing a cloth-covered basket on the table. My mother's recipe. Thomas always said they were worth getting up early for. They smell amazing, Lily replied, pouring coffee from a small ceramic pot. Maple glaze? Of course. Margaret smiled, settling into the comfortable chair. Some traditions are worth preserving. As they enjoyed the warm scones, Margaret shared yesterday's encounters, the lunch with Robert, the unexpected visit from the developer, and the clarity these confrontations had brought her. He really doesn't understand what the farm means. To you, does he? Lily asked, shaking her head in disbelief. Robert sees the world through a very particular lens, Margaret explained. Value measured in dollars, success defined by appearance, worth determined by practicality. It wasn't always that way. What changed him? Margaret considered the question. Many things, I suppose. College, where he studied business instead of agriculture. His marriage to Vanessa, whose family values status above substance. His work in corporate finance, where everything is reduced to assets and liabilities. She sighed. Perhaps I'm partly to blame. Thomas and I wanted to give him opportunities we never had, but in doing so, we may have disconnected him from what matters most. It's not too late for him to learn, Lily suggested gently. Perhaps. But I can't wait for that possibility while the farm languishes. Which brings me to why I wanted to speak with you. Margaret leaned forward slightly. Lily, how satisfied. Are you with the cafe space? The question clearly surprised the younger woman. It's adequate. Small, but manageable for now. Why do you ask? Because I've been thinking about possibilities, Margaret replied. About the future of Spencer's maple farm, about connections between past and present, about creating something new while honoring what came before. Over the next hour, Margaret outlined the vision that had begun forming in her mind, a collaboration that would benefit them both while preserving the Spencer legacy in an unexpected way. I'm not looking to retire completely, Margaret explained. The farm is my life's work, and I'm still capable of managing much of it. But I also recognize that some aspects have become more challenging, especially without Thomas. That's perfectly understandable, Lily assured her. Meanwhile, you've created something wonderful here, Margaret continued, gesturing around. The cozy cafe. Your baking is exceptional, your business sense is sound, and your values align with everything Thomas and I believed in. But you're limited by your current space. Lily nodded, curiosity evident in her expression. Go on. What if we combined our strengths? Margaret proposed. The farmhouse has a large kitchen that's barely used now. The front parlor could be converted to a cafe space with minimal changes. We already have parking, and the setting is beautiful year-round. You're suggesting? Lily began, her eyes widening. A partnership, Margaret confirmed. Spencer's Maple Farm and Cafe. Your baking expertise using our syrup. Tours of the sugar house during production season. Special events in the barn during summer. A place that honors Vermont traditions while creating new ones. Lily sat back, visibly processing the unexpected proposal. That's a remarkable idea. But Margaret, a partnership is a significant commitment. Are you sure you want to take that on with someone you've only just met? Margaret smiled, appreciating Lily's candor. I've been in business for over 40 years, Lily. I've developed a sense for people, who can be trusted, who shares my values, who puts heart into their work. You remind me of myself at your age, determined, principled. Willing to take risks for something you believe in. Tears welled in Lily's eyes. That means more than you know. But what about Robert? Won't he object? Undoubtedly, Margaret acknowledged. But the farm is mine, not his. Thomas left everything to me, with instructions that I should follow. My heart regarding its future. This feels right in a way that selling to developers never could. Can I think about it? Lily asked. It's not that I'm not interested, I am, very much. But it's a big decision. Of course, Margaret assured her. Take all the time you need. Visit the farm again, imagine the possibilities, consider the challenges. I've lived long enough to know that the best decisions aren't rushed. They parted with warm hugs, both women energized by the conversation despite its inconclusive nature. Margaret spent the remainder of the day addressing practical matters that had been neglected during Thomas's illness, contacting regular customers about the coming syrup season, scheduling maintenance for the production equipment, reviewing insurance policies. That evening, the phone rang just as Margaret was preparing a simple dinner. Emma's name appeared on the caller ID, surprising and delighting her. "Grandma?" Emma's voice sounded slightly hushed, as if she were calling secretly. "Are you busy?" "Never too busy for you, sweetheart," Margaret replied, settling into her chair. "Is everything all right?" "Yeah, I wanted to tell you I love the stocking you made. It's perfect. And I miss you." The simple declaration warmed Margaret's heart. "I miss you too, Emma. Very much." "Dad and Mom are fighting," Emma confided, her voice dropping further. "About the farm. About you. I heard them last night." Margaret chose her words carefully, mindful of not placing Emma in the middle of adult disagreements. Sometimes grown-ups have different opinions about important matters. That doesn't mean they don't love each other, or you. Mom said you were being stubborn and irrational. Dad said you had the right to decide, but he seemed really mad too. Emma paused. "Are they trying to make you sell our farm, Grandma?" The possessive "our farm" brought tears to Margaret's eyes. At least one of Thomas's grandchildren still felt connected to the legacy. "They believe selling would be best for everyone," Margaret explained gently. "I see things differently." "Good," Emma said with unexpected vehemence. "The farm is special. It's part of who we are. I hate that we never go there anymore." "You're welcome anytime, sweetheart. You know that." "Mom says it's too far. That it's not practical to drive all that way just to visit." The echo of Robert's favorite word wasn't lost on Margaret. "Well, perhaps sometime you can come for a weekend. When things settle down a bit." They chatted for a few more minutes before Emma had to go, promising to call again soon. The conversation left Margaret with mixed emotions: joy at Emma's continued connection to the farm, sadness at the family conflict, and renewed determination to find a path forward that might eventually heal these divisions. The following day brought unexpected news. Lily called early, her voice bubbling with excitement. "I couldn't sleep last night," she explained. "I kept thinking about your proposal, imagining possibilities, making lists of pros and cons. By morning, there was only one answer I could give. Yes. 1,000 times yes." Margaret's heart soared at the acceptance. "You're certain? You don't need more time?" "I've never been more certain of anything," Lily assured her. "This partnership combines everything I've been working toward: quality food, community connection, sustainable business. If you're still offering, I'm all in." "Then let's make it official," Margaret said, unable to contain her own excitement. "Come to the farm this afternoon. We'll toast our new venture properly." The day passed in a blur of anticipation. Margaret prepared a simple celebration: her best Vermont cheddar, fresh bread, and of course, maple treats. She opened a bottle of the local apple wine that she and Thomas had traditionally used to celebrate new beginnings. When Lily arrived, her face flushed with cold and excitement, Margaret felt a surge of certainty that they were embarking on something meaningful together. To Spencer's Maple Farm and Cafe, Margaret proposed, raising her glass once they were settled in the farmhouse kitchen. "May it honor the past while embracing the future." "To new beginnings and unexpected friendships," Lily added, her eyes bright with emotion. As they discussed initial plans, how to structure their partnership legally, what renovations would be needed, timing for a spring opening, Margaret felt more energized than she had in years. Thomas would have approved, she thought. He had always valued innovation balanced with tradition. "There's something else I wanted to discuss," Margaret said as their planning session wound down. She hesitated, then continued. "Something more personal." Lily gave her full attention, setting aside the notebook where she'd been jotting ideas. "The Spencer family has an heirloom," Margaret explained, touching the maple leaf brooch pinned to her sweater. "This brooch has been passed down through generations, always to the woman who would continue the farm's legacy." Lily's eyes widened. "It's beautiful. I had always assumed it would go to Vanessa eventually, as Robert's wife. But Vanessa has no interest in the farm's heritage. She sees this as costume jewelry, valuable only for its opals." "That's sad," Lily said softly. "It clearly means so much more." "It represents commitment," Margaret agreed. "Not just to the land or the business, but to the values that have guided the Spencer family: stewardship, integrity, community connection." She unpinned the brooch and held it in her palm, considering its gleaming surface. "I've been thinking about what family truly means. Is it only those connected by blood or marriage? Or is it those who share our deepest values, who commit to continuing what matters most to us?" Lily listened intently, her expression thoughtful. I won't pretend this partnership makes you family in the traditional sense, Margaret continued. But in the ways that matter most to me, honoring Thomas's legacy, preserving the farm's essence, continuing its role in the community, you've shown more understanding than my own son. She extended her hand, the brooch resting on her palm. I'd like you to wear this, Lily. Not as a gift of ownership, but as a symbol of shared commitment to what Spencer's Maple Farm represents. Lily's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the brooch. Margaret, I'm deeply honored. But are you sure? This should stay in your family. I am sure, Margaret said firmly. And it is staying in my family, the family of the heart, which sometimes matters more than the family of blood. Thomas would understand this choice, I believe. He valued authenticity above convention. With tears in her eyes, Lily carefully pinned the brooch to her sweater. The silver maple leaf seemed to belong there, as if it had found its rightful place. I promise to honor what this represents, Lily said, her voice thick with emotion. Every day, in every decision we make for the farm and cafe. They sealed this deeper commitment with another toast, this one silent but profound. Something significant had shifted, not just in their business relationship, but in their understanding of what family could mean. The peaceful moment was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. Through the kitchen window, Margaret recognized Robert's BMW pulling into the driveway. That's my son, she told Lily. This might be uncomfortable. Should I leave? Lily offered. Give you privacy for a family discussion? Margaret considered the question, then shook her head. No. If we're partners now, you should be part of difficult conversations as well as pleasant ones. Besides, it's time Robert understood that family business can have multiple meanings. Robert entered without knocking, a habit from childhood. That suddenly struck Margaret as presumptuous rather than familiar. His expression darkened when he saw Lily seated at the kitchen table, the partnership plans spread between them. Mom, he greeted her tersely. I didn't realize you had company. Robert, this is Lily Morrison. She owns the Cozy Bean Cafe in town. Lily, my son Robert. Lily stood and extended her hand. Pleased to meet you. I've heard a lot about you. Robert shook her hand perfunctorily, his attention already shifting back to Margaret. Mom, we need to talk. Privately. Anything you need to say can be said in front of Lily, Margaret replied calmly. We're business partners now. The statement landed like a physical blow. Robert stared at his mother, then at Lily, then at the papers on the table. Business partners, he repeated incredulously. What are you talking about? Lily and I are establishing Spencer's Maple Farm and Cafe, Margaret explained. We've been planning the details today. The papers will be drawn up next week. Robert's face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. You can't enter into a business partnership without consulting me. I'm your financial advisor. You're my son, Robert, not my guardian. I'm still perfectly capable of making sound business decisions. Sound? His voice rose. You're tying up a multi-million-dollar property in some half-baked cafe scheme with a complete stranger instead of accepting a legitimate offer from established developers? That's not sound, it's senile. The cruel word hung in the air between them. Margaret felt its sting but refused to show it. Beside her, Lily had gone very still, her expression carefully neutral. I think you should leave now, Margaret said. Quietly. When you're ready to discuss this respectfully, I'll be here. I'm trying to protect you, Robert insisted, his tone shifting to exasperated concern. This woman is obviously taking advantage of your grief, your loneliness. Can't you see that? Before Margaret could respond, Lily spoke up, her voice calm but firm. Mr. Spencer, I understand your concern for your mother. That's natural and appropriate. But please consider that she might understand her own needs and interests better than you do. Robert turned his attention to Lily, eyes narrowing. And what exactly are your interests in my mother's property? Let me guess, you're struggling financially, and suddenly a wealthy widow offers you a lifeline. How convenient. That's enough, Robert, Margaret interrupted, standing to face her son. You don't know Lily, and you clearly don't know me. Very well either if you think I'm easily manipulated. I've run a successful business longer than you've been alive. With Dad, Robert countered. You and Dad were partners. He handled the business side, you handled production. That was different. The dismissal of her business acumen cut deep, but Margaret maintained her composure. Your father and I made every major decision together, from the first expansion to the export contracts. He respected my judgment, even when we disagreed. I wish you could do the same. Robert's gaze fell on the maple leaf brooch now pinned to Lily's sweater. His expression shifted from anger to disbelief. Is that grandmother's brooch? He asked, his voice dropping dangerously. You gave a family heirloom to a stranger? I entrusted it to someone who values what it represents, Margaret corrected. The commitment to continue the Spencer legacy in a meaningful way. This is insane, Robert declared, running his hands through his hair in frustration. You're not thinking clearly, Mom. Grief has affected your judgment. I'm going to speak with our lawyer about options. What options would those be? Margaret asked calmly. Conservatorship, if necessary, Robert replied, the threat unmistakable. If you're making irrational decisions that threaten your financial security, the court can appoint someone to protect your interests. The word hung between them like a drawn weapon. Margaret had heard stories of elderly parents declared incompetent by children eager to control family assets. She'd never imagined facing such a threat from her own son. I've had a complete physical and cognitive assessment within the last 6 months, she informed him, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Dr. Mitchell found me to be in excellent health, mentally and physically. Feel free to request those records for your lawyer. Robert seemed momentarily taken aback by her preparedness, but recovered quickly. Assessments can be challenged. And this behavior, giving away family heirlooms, entering business partnerships without consultation, could be considered evidence of diminished capacity. Robert, Margaret said, her tone softening slightly. This doesn't have to be adversarial. I understand you're concerned, and perhaps disappointed that I'm not following the path you envisioned. But this farm is my life's work, not just an asset on a balance sheet. I'm trying to secure your future, he insisted. My future includes purpose and meaning, not just financial security, Margaret replied. The partnership with Lily provides both. It keeps the farm operational while adapting to new realities. Robert glanced at Lily, who had remained remarkably composed throughout the confrontation. And what do you get out of this arrangement? He demanded. The opportunity to build something meaningful, Lily answered honestly. To learn from your mother's experience, to expand my business in alignment with my values, to be part of a legacy that deserves continuation. Very noble, Robert scoffed. And the fact that you'll have access to a property worth millions is just a happy coincidence? The partnership agreement will be legally sound and fair to both parties, Margaret interjected. You're welcome to review it when it's complete. In fact, I'd appreciate your professional perspective, not as someone trying to change my mind, but as someone helping me implement my decision effectively. The distinction wasn't lost on Robert. His expression remained skeptical, but some of the combative energy seemed to drain from him. This isn't over, he said finally. Vanessa and I need to discuss implications for our family's future. I hope those discussions include recognition that the farm remains important to your children, Margaret replied. Emma called me yesterday. She still feels connected to this place, to its history. Robert's expression flickered with surprise, then hardened again. The kids are young. They don't understand financial realities. Perhaps they understand some things better than we give them credit for, Margaret suggested gently. With nothing left to say, Robert departed, the slam of his car door and spray of gravel marking his continued displeasure. Margaret watched him drive away, her heart heavy with the conflict but her resolve unshaken. Are you all right? Lily asked when the sound of the BMW had faded. Yes, Margaret said, surprised to find it was true. Sad, but certain. This partnership feels right. In a way that selling never did. He might follow through on that conservatorship threat, Lily warned. I've seen similar situations in my family. He might try, Margaret acknowledged. But I've lived an independent, competent life for 73 years. I've managed a successful business, raised a family, navigated Thomas's illness and death. A judge would need compelling evidence to declare me incapable now, simply because I've made a decision my son disapproves of. They returned to their planning, refusing to let Robert's interruption derail their momentum. By evening, they had outlined the initial renovations needed, discussed staffing requirements, and drafted a timeline for the spring opening. As Lily prepared to leave, she hesitated at the door. Margaret, are you sure about the brooch? It's caused such conflict already. Margaret touched Lily's shoulder reassuringly. All meaningful decisions cause some conflict. The brooch belongs with someone who will honor its symbolism. Wear it proudly. That night, alone in the farmhouse that had witnessed so many Spencer family moments, joyful and painful, harmonious and discordant, Margaret felt a curious peace descend. The confrontation with Robert had been difficult but clarifying. The partnership with Lily offered a path forward that honored Thomas's legacy while creating something new. Outside, the winter moon illuminated the snow-covered maple grove, the trees standing like sentinels across the rolling Vermont hills. They had weathered countless storms, bent but never broken by winter's fury, always renewing themselves when spring arrived. We're like those trees, Thomas, Margaret whispered to the quiet room. Resilient. Adaptable. capable of sweetness even after the harshest season. She could almost hear his reply, warm and reassuring in the stillness, "That's my Maggie. Always finding the way forward, even when the path isn't clear." With that comforting thought, Margaret prepared for bed, her mind already turning to tomorrow's tasks. The partnership with Lily had infused her with renewed purpose and energy. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Robert's potential legal maneuvers, the practical difficulties of renovations, the uncertainties of a new business model, she would face them with the same determination that had sustained her through 73 years of Vermont seasons. The maple leaf brooch had found its new guardian. The Spencer legacy would continue, though in a form Robert couldn't yet understand or accept. And Margaret Spencer, no longer simply a widow struggling with loss and rejection, had become once again what she had always been at heart, a creator, a nurturer, a woman with meaningful work before her. As sleep claimed her, Margaret's final conscious thought was not of conflict but of possibility, of spring's approaching renewal, of a farmhouse once again filled with purpose and community, of a legacy reimagined rather than abandoned. Some might call it stubbornness. Margaret preferred to think of it as faithfulness, to Thomas, to the land, and most importantly, to herself. 3 months had passed since Margaret and Lily had formalized their partnership. Winter had been filled with purposeful activity, renovating the farmhouse parlor into a welcoming cafe space, updating the kitchen to meet commercial standards, designing marketing materials that honored tradition while embracing innovation. Each task had strengthened their bond, confirming Margaret's intuition that this unlikely friendship was meant to become something more significant. The legal battle Robert had threatened materialized in a limited fashion. His attorney had sent formal letters questioning Margaret's capacity to enter new business arrangements, requesting extensive documentation of her mental and physical health. Margaret's own lawyer, Ellen Hargrove, had responded with comprehensive medical evaluations, business plans showing sound financial projections, and a firmly worded reminder about the legal rights of competent adults to manage their own affairs. "He's posturing," Ellen had assured Margaret during their last meeting. "The documentation we've provided makes any conservatorship claim virtually impossible to pursue. He knows that, which is why they haven't actually filed anything with the court." The practical challenges of launching their new venture had proven more manageable than the emotional weight of family discord. Robert and Vanessa maintained a chilly distance, communicating only through formal emails regarding the children's schedules. Emma had visited twice, delighting in the cafe renovations and offering teenage perspectives on menu options. Jackson and Amelia had come once, accompanied by their nanny rather than their parents, a compromise that spoke volumes about the ongoing tension. Today, however, Margaret had no time to dwell on family complications. The first official day of operation for Spencer's Maple Farm and Cafe had arrived, coinciding perfectly with the height of syrup production season. Their soft opening the previous weekend had drawn locals curious about the transformation of the historic property, but today would bring tourists and maple enthusiasts from across New England. "Are you ready for this?" Lily asked, joining Margaret on the farmhouse porch as dawn painted the hills with golden light. She wore a crisp apron emblazoned with their new logo, a stylized maple leaf with subtle coffee cup imagery incorporated into the design. The Spencer family brooch gleamed at her collar, catching the early morning sunlight. "More ready than I've been for anything in years," Margaret replied honestly. She smoothed her own matching apron and surveyed the property with pride. The parking area had been neatly graveled, with handcrafted wooden signs directing visitors to the cafe, the sugar house, and the walking trails through the maple grove. Window boxes awaited spring flowers, and rocking chairs lined the wide porch, inviting guests to linger. "The first tour group arrives at 10, Margaret continued, consulting the schedule they'd established. "I'll handle that while you manage the cafe rush. The demonstration tapping is at 11:30, then we'll switch for the afternoon." "Perfect," Lily agreed. "The maple scones are already in the oven, and I've prepared extra batter for the pancake tastings." Inside, their small but efficient staff was already at work. Margaret and Lily had hired selectively, a barista with family ties to Vermont agriculture, a retired teacher to assist with educational components, 2 local culinary students eager for real-world experience with farm-to-table concepts. Each employee had been chosen not just for skills but for their appreciation of the value Spencer's Maple Farm represented. As Margaret supervised final preparations in the sugar house, making sure the evaporator was operating at peak efficiency, and the educational displays were properly arranged, she felt Thomas's presence more strongly than at any time since his passing. "You'd approve, I think," she murmured, adjusting a photograph of him demonstrating tapping techniques to a school group years earlier. "Not what we planned, but true to what matters most." The morning unfolded with the pleasant chaos of a successful launch. Cars began arriving shortly after 9, filling the parking area and spilling onto the grass verge that would become an expanded lot if demand continued. The cafe quickly filled with visitors enjoying maple-infused pastries and specialty coffee drinks, while others explored the property self-guided until the formal tours began. Margaret led the first group through the maple grove with practiced ease, explaining the science and tradition behind syrup production. She noted with satisfaction how visitors engaged with the information, asking thoughtful questions and expressing genuine interest in sustainable forestry practices. The trees you're seeing are part of a carefully managed ecosystem, she explained to the attentive group. Some have been producing sap for over 100 years. We never take more than the tree can healthily provide, and we maintain biodiversity throughout the property. A woman near the back of the group raised her hand. I read that many traditional maple farms are being sold for development. What made you decide to maintain this operation instead of cashing in? The question might have been painful months earlier, but now Margaret answered with serene confidence. This land isn't just property, it's a living heritage. My late husband and I believed we were stewards rather than owners, responsible for preserving something valuable for future generations. She gestured toward the farmhouse, where the cafe's windows glowed invitingly. But stewardship doesn't mean freezing in time. It means thoughtful evolution. The cafe partnership allows us to share our traditions with more people while creating new economic viability. The answer resonated with the group, several nodding in understanding. As Margaret continued the tour, demonstrating tapping techniques and explaining how weather affected sap quality, she noticed a familiar car pulling into the parking area. Her heart skipped as she recognized Robert's BMW. Maintaining her professional composure, Margaret completed the tour, answered final questions, and directed the group toward the sugar house where they could observe the evaporation process. Then she made her way toward the cafe, uncertain what this unexpected visit might bring. She found Robert seated alone at a corner table, a cup of coffee and maple crumb cake before him. He wore casual clothes rather than his usual business attire, and something in his posture seemed less rigid than during their last confrontation. Robert, she greeted him, sliding into the chair across from him. This is a surprise. A good one, I hope, he replied, his tone careful but not hostile. I thought I should see what you've created here. Margaret studied her son's face, noting signs of strain around his eyes. What do you think so far? It's. He hesitated, glancing around the bustling cafe. Not what I expected. It's quite professional. Coming from Robert, this constituted high praise. Margaret allowed herself a small smile. Thank you. We've worked hard to get everything right for the opening. The place is packed, he observed. Much busier than the old farm tours ever were. The cafe draws people who might not have visited just for maple production, Margaret explained. And once they're here, many get curious about the agricultural aspects. It's working exactly as Lily and I hoped. At the mention of Lily, Robert's expression tightened slightly. I see she's wearing grandmother's brooch. Margaret chose her response carefully. Yes. It reminds us both of what we're building here, not just a business, but a continuation of values. Robert took a deliberate sip of his coffee, then set the cup down with precision. Mom, I've been doing some thinking since our last discussion. Oh? Margaret kept her tone neutral, though. Hope flickered cautiously. I may have reacted too strongly, he admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. Vanessa and I discussed it at length. We consulted with my attorney about your documentation. And while I still believe selling would have been the more practical choice, he said, emphasizing his favorite word, I recognize that you have the right to make your own decisions. The medical evaluations were quite thorough. You're clearly competent. The reluctant acknowledgement might have seemed insulting from anyone else, but from Robert, it represented significant concession. Margaret reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Thank you for saying that, she said simply. It means a great deal to me. Robert nodded stiffly, then continued. I've also been considering what you said about Emma's connection to this place. She's been quite vocal about wanting to visit more often. Margaret smiled, thinking of her granddaughter's enthusiasm during her previous visits. She has a natural affinity for the farm. She reminds me of you at that age, actually. Me? Robert looked genuinely surprised. You were fascinated by every aspect of production when you were young, Margaret reminded him. You used to follow your father around for hours, asking endless questions about tapping techniques and sap grading. Robert's expression softened slightly with the memory. I'd forgotten that. Children often see value in things adults have learned to measure differently, Margaret observed. Emma recognizes intuitively what I've spent years trying to explain to you, that this farm is more than just land and trees. It's living history, a connection to something larger than ourselves. Robert didn't respond immediately, his attention caught by something across the room. Margaret turned to see Lily leading a small group of children in what appeared to be a maple-themed activity at a dedicated kids' table. Among them were Jackson and Amelia, their faces alight with excitement as they created something with maple leaves and art supplies. Vanessa brought them, Robert explained, following her gaze. She's taking a tour of the sugar house. We thought the children should see what their grandmother has created. The simple statement conveyed volumes about shifts occurring within Robert's thinking. Not full acceptance, certainly, but movement toward understanding. I'm glad, Margaret said softly. This place is part of their heritage, too. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the children's engagement with the activity. When Robert spoke again, his tone was more businesslike, but not unkind. The partnership seems to be functioning well. The legal structure you established is actually quite sound. I reviewed the documents thoroughly. Ellen helped us create something fair and forward-thinking, Margaret acknowledged. But Lily deserves much of the credit for the business model. Her background in corporate finance before opening the cafe gave her excellent perspective. Corporate finance? Robert echoed, surprise evident in his voice. 8 years at Goldman Sachs, Margaret confirmed, enjoying his reaction. She left to pursue something more meaningful to her, but she understands numbers quite well. This revelation clearly caused Robert to recalibrate his assumptions about Lily. Before he could respond, Vanessa approached their table, her expression carefully composed. The sugar house tour was quite informative, she said, directing her comment to Margaret rather than her husband. Your guide explained everything very clearly. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Margaret replied, noting subtle differences in her daughter-in-law's demeanor. The usual chill was tempered, though true warmth remained distant. The children are having a wonderful time, Vanessa continued. Lily, is that her name? Is very good with them. She has a gift for making people feel welcome, Margaret agreed. Would you like to join us? I can have someone bring you coffee. Vanessa hesitated, then nodded. That would be nice. Thank you. As she settled into a chair, Margaret signaled one of the staff, who quickly brought another coffee and selection of pastries. The conversation that followed was not entirely comfortable. But neither was it hostile. They discussed neutral topics, the children's school activities, the unusually warm spring, mutual acquaintances from town. Eventually, Robert broached the subject that clearly remained on his mind. Mom, I need to ask, are you financially secure with this new arrangement? The development offer would have provided significant security. I appreciate your concern, Margaret said sincerely. But yes, I'm quite secure. The partnership agreement includes provisions for both immediate income and long-term stability. More importantly, it provides purpose and community, which contribute more to well-being at my age than additional wealth would. The projections look promising, Robert acknowledged. Assuming tourism remains consistent and operational costs don't escalate unexpectedly. All business involves some risk, Margaret pointed out. But we've been conservative in our estimates and built-in contingency planning. Thomas taught me that much. The mention of her late husband brought a flicker of something, regret? Nostalgia? To Robert's expression. Dad was always careful that way. Innovative but prudent. A good balance to strike, Margaret agreed. I think we've managed something similar here, honoring tradition while embracing necessary change. As they continued talking, Margaret observed subtle shifts in both Robert and Vanessa. Not wholesale transformation, but small openings in their rigid positions. When Lily stopped by the table to check on them, Robert engaged her in genuine conversation. About the business model, his professional interest evidently piqued by what he was seeing. We've developed specialized events for different seasons, Lily explained in response to his question about year-round viability. Summer farm-to-table dinners in the barn, autumn harvest festivals, winter workshops on traditional crafts. The cafe provides consistent revenue while the seasonal activities create marketing opportunities. Diversified income streams, Robert nodded approvingly. Smart approach. When the children joined them, full of excitement about their maple leaf art projects and eager to share what they'd learned about sap collection, the atmosphere warmed further. Margaret watched with quiet joy as her grandchildren bridged the emotional gaps between the adults, their natural enthusiasm creating common ground. Grandma, can we help collect sap next year? Jackson asked, bouncing slightly in his eagerness. The guide said children used to help all the time. That's absolutely true, Margaret confirmed. Your father was carrying collection buckets when he was about your age. You were, Daddy? Amelia looked at her father with newfound interest. I was, Robert admitted, something softening in his expression. Grandpa Thomas taught me how to check which trees were producing the best sap. Could you show us? Emma asked, surprising everyone with her direct appeal to her father rather than her grandmother. Robert hesitated, then nodded. Maybe next season. If Grandma thinks it would be helpful. Always, Margaret said simply. Extra hands are always welcome during collection season. The visit stretched longer than Margaret had anticipated, with Robert and Vanessa eventually taking the children for a walk through the maple grove while Margaret returned to her hosting duties. When they finally prepared to leave, the goodbye held none of the tension that had characterized recent encounters. This is impressive, Mom, Robert said as they stood by his car. Different from what I envisioned for the property, but impressive nonetheless. Thank you, Margaret replied, recognizing the significance of his acknowledgement. That means a great deal coming from you. We'll bring the children again, Vanessa added, her tone suggesting this was a concession she deliberated over. They've clearly enjoyed themselves. After they drove away, Margaret found Lily in the farmhouse kitchen, preparing for the afternoon pancake demonstration. That seemed to go well, Lily observed cautiously. At least, no one stormed out or threatened legal action. Margaret laughed softly. A definite improvement. I think seeing the reality of what we've created here made a difference. It's harder to dismiss something once you've experienced its value firsthand. Do you think they're fully on board now? No, Margaret said honestly. Robert still believes selling would have been more practical. Vanessa still finds our operation less sophisticated than she'd prefer. But they're beginning to see it through their children's eyes, which offers a different perspective. A start, then, Lily concluded, mixing batter with practiced efficiency. A significant one, Margaret agreed. Family reconciliations rarely happen all at once. They unfold gradually, one conversation, one shared experience at a time. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of activity, tours, demonstrations, cafe service, and conversations with visitors enchanted by the unique combination of agricultural tradition and culinary innovation. By closing time, Margaret was physically exhausted but spiritually energized. As the last visitors departed and the staff completed their closing tasks, Margaret and Lily settled into rocking chairs on the farmhouse porch. The April evening had turned cool, but woolen blankets and steaming mugs of tea provided ample comfort. Successful first day, Lily observed, surveying the now quiet property with satisfaction. Beyond my expectations, honestly. Mine too, Margaret admitted. Though Thomas would say we shouldn't be surprised when something built on solid values succeeds. They rocked in companionable silence for a few minutes, watching as twilight settled over the hills. The maple trees stood in silhouette against the darkening sky, their newly emerging leaves rustling gently in the evening breeze. I've been thinking about what you said to that tour group, Lily said eventually. About being stewards rather than owners. It's a profound way to view property. Thomas felt it deeply, Margaret explained. His family had tended this land for generations, but he never saw that as conferring absolute rights. Rather, it created deeper responsibility. Robert seems to be reconsidering his position, Lily observed carefully. He's beginning to, Margaret agreed. Seeing his children connect with this place reminds him of his own childhood connections. Those early imprints run deep, even when temporarily forgotten. The maple leaf brooch at Lily's collar caught the last light of day, gleaming with quiet significance. Margaret reached over and touched it gently. I'm glad you're wearing this, she said. It belongs with someone who understands what it represents. I wear it with honor, Lily assured her. And with awareness of the responsibility it symbolizes. As darkness deepened around them, Margaret reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months earlier, she had stood in her son's penthouse, feeling diminished and discarded, hearing his dismissive assessment that she had nothing left to give. The pain of that rejection had been real, cutting deeply into her sense of worth and purpose. Yet that painful moment had ultimately catalyzed transformation. Like maple sap flowing from careful tapping, something sweet had emerged from what initially felt like wounding. The partnership with Lily, the reimagining of the farm's purpose, the gradual rebuilding of family connections, all had flowed from that moment of crisis. You know, Margaret said thoughtfully, there's wisdom in the maple sugaring process that applies beyond syrup production. How so? Lily asked, turning toward her with interest. The sap only flows when conditions create the right pressure, freezing nights followed by warmer days. Without that stress, there's no movement, no possibility of transformation. Lily considered this. You're saying difficult experiences can create necessary pressure for positive change? Exactly, Margaret nodded. When Robert told me I had nothing left to give, it was cruel and untrue. But it forced me to reconsider who I was and what I valued. Without that painful moment, we might not be sitting here now. From rejection to renewal, Lily mused. A powerful journey. One as old as the seasons, Margaret agreed. The winter dormancy that precedes spring's awakening. The apparent ending that contains new beginnings. As they continued rocking, sharing observations about the day and plans for tomorrow, Margaret felt profound gratitude wash over her. The farm that had been her anchor through 50 years of marriage had evolved into something new while remaining true to its essence. The family relationships that had seemed irreparably damaged were showing signs of healing. And she herself had discovered capacities for innovation and adaptation that she hadn't known she possessed. When Vanessa had coldly suggested that Margaret leave their holiday gathering or face security, she had felt humiliated and worthless. Now she recognized that moment as an unexpected gift, the painful pressure that had ultimately set transformation in motion. "We should go in soon," Lily said eventually, noting the deepening chill. "Tomorrow will be another full day." "Yes," Margaret agreed, but neither woman moved immediately. The peaceful conclusion to a successful day felt too precious to rush. In the distance, an owl called softly, its voice carrying across the darkened maple grove. The trees stood sentinel, as they had for generations of Spencers, witnesses to both human struggles and reconciliations. Margaret thought of Thomas, of the legacy they had built together, of his faith in her strength and wisdom. She thought of Robert, beginning to reconnect with values he had temporarily forgotten in pursuit of what he'd believed was success. She thought of her grandchildren, their natural affinity for this place promising continuation beyond her own lifetime. And she thought of the unexpected friendship with Lily that had blossomed into partnership, demonstrating that family could be defined by shared values as much as by blood connection. "Ready now?" Lily asked gently, sensing Margaret's contemplative mood. "Yes," Margaret replied, rising with the quiet dignity that had carried her through 73 years of Vermont seasons. "Tomorrow is another opportunity to create something meaningful together." As they entered the farmhouse that now hummed with renewed purpose, Margaret Spencer felt the rightness of her choices settle deep in her bones. The painful rejection she had experienced months earlier had led not to diminishment but to expansion, of possibilities, of connections, of her own understanding of what she still had to give. Outside, the maple trees stood patient in the darkness, their roots drawing nourishment from Vermont soil, their branches reaching toward stars that had guided generations of Spencers. Inside, the farmhouse embraced its new purpose, blending tradition with innovation in ways that honored the past while creating space for the future. And in her heart, Margaret carried the sweet certainty that comes from aligning actions with deepest values, the knowledge that regardless of age or circumstance, a life guided by integrity and courage continues to unfold in meaningful ways, season after season, through winter's dormancy into spring's magnificent renewal. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.